Hi everyone, and welcome back to Financial Basics, where we make money grow with you. Today I'm going to be discussing average net worth by age. This video is a small tribute to Charlie Munger. People love numbers, especially when they are about money. And we've all seen those charts or the videos on them talking about average net worth by age and how as you get older, your net worth will naturally grow. By 30, you should have this much. By 40, you should be at this point. And by 60, you better have made it. That's the message we constantly hear. You are behind if you don't have X amount. And that's what the so-called experts say. It sounds fancy and cool, but most of it is complete garbage. Averages lie because they don't tell you the whole truth. They actually hide it. If you take 100 people and Bill Gates walks in, suddenly the average net worth in the room is hundreds of millions. But 99 of them are still broke. And that's the problem with averages. They flatter the crowd and lie to you. When Charlie was young, nobody told him what his net worth should be at each age. Everyone was too busy trying not to starve. The Great Depression didn't hand out charts. It handed out immense suffering and pain. There's no smooth, clear, easy, step-by-step line of wealth accumulation when half the country is in abject poverty. And if you see those lovely graphs, the average 35-year-old has 75,000 saved, you should just laugh. Half of those people have less. Some have nothing at all, and a few outliers bring up the rest. It's like watching a poker game where one person holds all the chips and the others are just sitting there pretending to play and drinking bad coffee. People hate hearing this. They want reassurance. They want comfort. They want to believe if they're behind some imaginary schedule, they're doomed. And if they're ahead, they're amazing. Both are complete delusions. What really matters is not what your neighbors are worth. It's whether you can live below your means, stay out of stupid debt, and leave your investment engine alone to continue to compound. People in their 50s who look rich but owe money on everything, cars, houses, vacations, credit cards, they're one missed payment away from complete disaster. But their average net worth chart puts them in the successful column. And that's why averages don't matter. They trick you into feeling smart without actually being smart. If you want to play that game, ignore the group averages. Build your own report card. And the first rule of that report card is really straightforward. If you owe more than you own, you're not rich. You are negative. And it doesn't matter if you're 25 or 65, the reality of the math is brutal and does not care about your feelings. When you hear average net worth by age, it's kind of like the average temperature of a hospital. Some patients are freezing in the morgue. Others are burning with fever. That's not insight, that's noise. And if you live your life by financial noise, you'll end up like just another broke average. One of the dumbest habits humans can't seem to quit is comparing themselves to others. It starts in grad school with your grades, trophies, popularity contests, and it follows you into adulthood with paychecks, houses, cars, and even, yes, net worth. Envy doesn't make you happier. It doesn't make the other person poorer. It just poisons your mind. Look at these average net worth by age charts. They're nothing but fuel for envy and self-congratulations. If you're above average, fantastic, you're flying, well done. And if you're below average, begin the misery and begin figuring out what you can do to get up to average. Neither reaction helps you one bit. Take the average 40-year-old. Suppose the chart says they should have 150,000 saved. One man reads it, looks at his 200,000 and thinks he's a genius. Another man looks at his 50,000 and thinks he's a failure. Both are wrong because the future doesn't care about today's averages. The man ahead could blow it all chasing dumb investments. The man behind could save aggressively, compound for 20 years, and pass everyone. You stop thinking about your own circumstances, your skills, your discipline, your spending, and instead measure yourself against strangers who don't matter. When Charlie was in his 30s, he wasn't sitting around calculating how he stacked up against some imaginary average American. He was trying to build something durable, avoid idiotic mistakes, and keep reinvesting what he had. That's it. If he wasted his time worrying whether he was richer than his neighbors, he would have actually ended up poorer. The comparison distracts you from the only real opponent, you. Let me tell you a story. There was a man who made good money as an executive. By 50 he had more than most of his peers, but he also had a terrible habit. He compared himself to the wrong crowd. He looked at billionaires, envied their yachts, and then felt poor. So he tried desperately to catch up. Private jets, risky deals, leveraged investments. 10 years later, surprise, he wasn't rich anymore. He was bankrupt. And that's the irony. Chasing envy is the fastest way to fall behind. Net worth is personal. It's not a race. Do you spend less than you earn? Do you avoid stupid debt? Do you invest in productive assets? It's maths. Answer these questions correctly and you'll probably be fine, whether you're above or below the so-called average line. And the trap is simple. Once you start measuring your life by someone else's ruler, you lose track of your own progress. So here's the advice. Stop asking, how am I doing compared to the average? And start asking, how am I doing compared to the best I could reasonably do? That's the only comparison that you want to make. It's all that matters. Because the truth is, averages don't pay your bills, and envy doesn't build wealth. Only rational behavior does. And here's a really hard truth. Most people will never get rich. Not because it's impossible, but because they can't stop asking and being stupid with their money. They spend everything they make. They borrow to buy things they don't need. And then they act surprised when they reach 40 with nothing to show for it. Charlie watched this pattern his entire life. It didn't matter when it happened, whether it was the 1930s, the 1970s, or even 2025. The majority will blow their chances. Just look at the statistics. The average American household spends more than it earns, at least in some years. Credit card balances pile up. Car loans stretch for 7 years. Student loans hang around in the Middle Ages, into your 30s and 40s. And yet these same people read about average net worth by age and think they're in the game. They're not. They're just standing on quicksand, and the illusion is powerful. A man with 500,000 and 50,000 in cars looks wealthy. But if the mortgage and the car loans equals 480,000, his net worth is barely more than a college kid with a part-time job. People forget the equation is assets minus liabilities. That's the formula. Owning something with a loan attached doesn't make you rich. It just makes you a renter with extra paperwork. Ask yourself, do these people feel envy for others? Yeah, Jeff Bezos, that was the car he was driving when his net worth was 10 billion. You need to check yourself, look at your car and go, why am I driving a car better than somebody with a net worth of 10 billion? There was a couple of doctors. On paper, they were doing great. Big house, luxury car, private school for their kids. But underneath it all, it was borrowed. Their net worth was fragile. One medical downturn, one bad investment away from total collapse. And the collapse came. By the time they were in their 60s, they had to sell that big house and start over. Were they average on the chart? Yes. Maybe even above average. But averages don't protect you when the bills come due. The reason most people stay broke is simple. They focus on looking rich instead of being rich. Going to Greece doesn't require a yacht. It requires liquidity, reserves, ownership. It requires not owing your soul to the bank. And yet, if you tell people this, most shrug. They'd rather keep up the appearances. And that's why these average net worth figures are misleading. They create the illusion of financial health, while the reality is financial debt and addiction. If you want a real measure of financial success, it's not what your net worth is by 35 or even 55. It's how resilient are you when things go wrong, because they will go wrong. Markets will crash, jobs will disappear, and health declines. If your financial house collapses the moment the wind blows, you were never rich. You were just playing dress up. So when people ask, what should my net worth be by age 40? I answer, enough to survive the storm. If you can't say yes to that, you're not ahead, you're behind. People like tidy charts. They like lines that slope up steadily. 30, 40, 50, richer at every step. It gives them comfort. But life doesn't work like that. Wealth doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows in fits and starts with setbacks in between. Take Charlie. In the 1970s, he lost a fortune on a dumb investment in real estate development. That line didn't slope neatly upwards that year. For those 2 years in 1973 and 74, it tanked. And the same is true for nations. Look at the stock market in 1929. Minus 11%, minus 29%, minus 47%, minus 15%. That is a cumulative loss of minus 71.7%. $1,000 at the start of this dip would have been $282 by the end of it. The market rebounded in 1933 with a 46.59% rise. Plenty of Americans thought they were on track, and then the crash came. And suddenly the average net worth didn't mean a thing. The myth of linear progress is extremely dangerous. It makes people think if they just keep breathing and living their life, the money will grow. But compounding only works if you avoid blowing yourself up. It's not brilliance that makes you people rich. It's avoiding stupidity long enough for compounding to do its work. But stupidity is everywhere and it's easy. People over leverage, they chase fads, and they assume that the next decade will be the exact same as the last, and it rarely is. Wealth building looks more like climbing a hill of sand than a neat staircase. Every time you push forward, you will almost always slip back a bit. Sometimes a storm comes and wipes half of it away. The key is not to quit and not to dig your own hole while you're at it. There was a man in the 80s who invested well for 20 years. By age 50, he had millions. And then he got greedy. He borrowed heavily to expand into businesses he didn't understand. The downturn of 1991 wiped him out, and he never recovered. Now, what would that chart say about him? At 50, he was way above average. At 60, he was way below average. The line didn't slope up, it plunged. That's the reality. When you see neat tables showing how wealth should rise with age, understand these are fairy tales. Nobody's financial life follows a perfect line. What matters is not the slope of the line, but your ability to survive the dips, because there will always be dips. I don't care if you're 25 or 75. If you think money will only go up, you're living in fantasy land. The truth is, real wealth is messy, and it grows in uneven stretches. The man who doesn't panic in downturns, doesn't overreach in booms, and keeps compounding over decades wins. So forget the chart, forget the straight line, aim for resilience, not illusion. If you want to understand why the average net worth by age is so misleading, just look at debt. It's the great eraser. One line on a balance sheet can wipe out a lifetime of hard work. Most people don't understand how destructive it is. They think, I can afford the payments. That's not wealth, that's just servitude. Brilliant men go broke, not because they didn't earn enough, but because they borrowed too much. Whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, or an executive, it doesn't matter. When the bills come to you, debt doesn't care about your title. Take the average 35-year-old in America. Maybe the chart says they should have $75,000 in net worth. But if they owe $40,000 in student loans, $15,000 on the credit cards, and $20,000 in car payments, how much do they really own? You don't get to go through your neighbor's mail. You don't see the other half of the equation. They might own almost nothing. And that's the reality behind averages. In Charlie's youth, debt was shameful. If you didn't brag about owing money, you avoided it like the disease. Today it's normalized. People treat debt as if it's part of life. Home loan, car loan, phone contract, even vacation loan. People like Robert Kiyosaki are writing books and talking about owing $1.2 billion in debt. It's complete madness. Charlie avoided personal debt like the plague. Even when Charlie was building his career, he refused to touch consumer loans. If he couldn't buy something outright, he didn't need it. It wasn't because he was aesthetic or some kind of monk. He simply hated being beholden to anyone. Independence was worth more than the toys. And that's something the average net worth by age chart never even measures. What about independence? A man with 100,000 saved and no debt is far richer than a man with 500,000 in assets and 400,000 in liabilities. The chart will probably rank them the same, but reality doesn't care about your chart. The trick with debt is it works in reverse. It compounds and the interest works against you instead of for you. And once you're in deep, it's damn near impossible to dig out. People spend their best years paying off stupid decisions they made in their 20s. A luxury car, a flashy wedding, a house bigger than they needed. Those choices look glamorous at the time. Decades later, they look like shackles. If you want to be truly wealthy, forget chasing averages. Focus on one thing and one thing only: freedom from debt. That is your building block. That is your foundation. If you own more than you own, your net worth is just a number on a spreadsheet, nothing more. And when the tide goes out, as Buffett likes to say, you'll see who's swimming naked. Most people, it turns out, if you strip away the noise, wealth comes down to one boring word: discipline. Not luck, but discipline. People don't like hearing that. They'd rather believe in secrets or shortcuts. But the truth is dull, and that's why so few practice it. Here's an example. Two young men start with the same salary at age 25. One saves diligently, invests in broad, low-cost assets, and lives below their means. The other spends everything on cars, gadgets, nights out. Fast forward 20 years, the disciplined one has a solid net worth. Maybe not glamorous, but real. The other, they're starting from scratch, maybe even in debt. Same income, different behavior. And that's why the average net worth by age charts are useless. They assume everyone has discipline. Most don't. When Charlie was rising up earlier in his career, he didn't try to beat the market every week. He just avoided the obvious mistakes. No speculation, no borrowing, no chasing fads. This boring formula compounded for decades. The irony is people think discipline is restrictive. They see it as a sacrifice. In reality, it's the opposite. Discipline buys you freedom. Freedom to walk away from a bad job. Freedom to avoid desperation. Freedom to say no. Undisciplined people will never get that freedom. They're too busy patching holes in their financial boat. They keep drilling themselves. There was a man in the 90s who earned millions as a tech executive. By all appearances, he was rich, but he lacked discipline. He blew money on speculative ventures, luxury, and constant upgrades. When the bubble burst, he was nearly bankrupt. Contrast that with someone with modest living, below their means, letting the investments grow steadily. The modest one ends up wealthy. The flashy one ends up bitter. It's not intelligence that separates them. It's discipline. People laugh when Charlie tells them the secret to wealth is spend less than you earn, invest the surplus, repeat. They think that's too simple. But that's exactly why it works. You want a chart that matters more than average net worth by age? Here it is. Wealth. Everything else is just noise. Most people confuse ownership with appearance. They think because they control something today, they own it. But if the bank can take it away tomorrow, you don't own a damn thing. And that's why I laugh at these average net worth by age charts. They count assets without asking the only question that matters: who really owns it? You don't own a house if the mortgage is larger than the equity. You don't own a car if you're still making payments. And you certainly don't own freedom if your lifestyle depends on borrowed money. Real ownership is quiet. If the family that owns a modest home outright, while their neighbors juggle payments on a mansion, it's the man with a portfolio of boring, dividend-paying stocks instead of a garage full of shiny cars. When Charlie was young, he learned this the hard way. He saw plenty of families who looked rich, new suits, big homes, brilliant, beautiful cars, and then the bank came knocking, and suddenly they're not rich anymore. Ownership is durable. Illusion is fragile. One of the most important decisions Charlie made early in his life was to prioritize assets that produced income over things that produce envy. A stock that throws off a dividend beats a luxury car that throws off a repair bill. It's not complicated. It requires a spine. The truth is, most people don't want ownership. They want illusion. They want to look successful at 30, even if it means being broke at 60. And that's why averages are dangerous. They count illusions as if they're assets. They paint a picture of wealth where there's only leverage. If you want to measure net worth properly, subtract the illusions. Don't ask what you own. Ask what you could still keep if every paycheck stopped tomorrow. That's the real test. If you don't pass that test, your wealth isn't wealth, it's just borrowed time. When you see those charts, don't ask, am I above or below average? Ask, how much of this is truly mine? The answer is usually sobering, but it's the only answer that actually matters. People love averages because they feel scientific and precise. But it's a complete mess behind that illusion. The average net worth by age doesn't tell you anything about the distribution. It hides the fact that most people have very little, while a handful hold almost everything. And these charts are designed to make you believe everyone is doing fine, or that you're failing if you don't have that number. Both assumptions are wrong. When Charlie was in his 40s, if someone had told him, Charlie, the average man your age has 100,000 saved, he wouldn't have cared. It wouldn't have helped him earn more, spend less, or invest better. It's just trivia. It's not wisdom. The lesson isn't in the averages. The interesting part is in the behaviors that create the outliers. The people far above average got there for specific reasons. They avoided dumb debt, they lived below their means, and they let compounding work for decades. And the people below the average, they usually sabotage themselves with overspending, chasing fads, borrowing too much, or failing to plan. The middle, or those close to the average, they often drift one way or the other over time. They're not locked in. But averages make it seem like there's some destiny written by your birth year. It's complete nonsense. The truth is, averages blind you from seeing the extremes. And in wealth, the extremes matter far more than the middle. Averages also trick people into complacency. If they're ahead of the curve, they relax. If you're behind the curve, you despair. Both reactions are foolish. The only real measure is progress against your own rational plan. You don't build wealth by comparing yourself to the average. You build it by asking yourself again and again and again, am I avoiding stupidity long enough for compounding to bail me out? That's the lesson averages can't teach, because averages don't show the behavior, the resilience, or the discipline. They only show numbers on a page. And here's the truth. If you're obsessed with the average net worth by age, you're probably thinking like the average person. And thinking like the average person is the surest way to stay broke. Here's a radical idea. Most of the numbers people obsess over don't matter. Not average net worth, not what are your peers doing, not some magic number you should have by 40 or even 60. The only net worth that matters is the one that buys you independence and freedom. Independence from a boss, independence from the banks, independence when the stock market starts to wobble or drops. That's real wealth. Charlie knew people with millions who weren't free. They owed money everywhere. They needed the next deal to stay afloat, and they were terrified of slipping. He also knew people with far less. Teachers, small business owners, or farmers who were rich in the way that really counts. They controlled their time. They didn't answer to creditors. They slept at night. Wealth isn't about comparing to a chart. It's about subtracting your obligations until you own your life outright. Think about it. What good is a $2 million portfolio if your lifestyle costs $300,000 a year and collapses the moment your income dries up? Meanwhile, a man with $500,000, low expenses and no debt is practically untouchable. And that's why Charlie said envy is poison and averages are just noise. Focus instead on building a fortress around your life. And it isn't just dollars, it's habits, it's resilience, it's the ability to keep compounding without interruption for decades. If you have that, you're rich. Even if the chart says otherwise. If you don't, you're fragile, even if the chart flatters you. And that's the irony. Most people are so busy chasing benchmarks, they never ask the one question that matters. Do I actually own my life, or am I renting it from debt and desperation? That's the only scorecard that counts. Forget the averages. Put those average charts down. Don't worry about the number. Ask yourself, do you have the freedom to live rationally without fear? If the answer is yes, congratulations, you're rich. If the answer is no, you have work to do. But don't look at a chart to guide you. Look in the mirror. And this is the final truth about all this average net worth by age nonsense. If you think like the average person, you will end up with the average result. And the average result for most people is lousy. The average person spends too much, saves too little, and invests poorly. The average person buys liabilities and calls them assets. The average person compares themselves to their neighbors until they're broke and bitter. Why on earth would you want to be average? I never cared about being above or below some chart. I cared about staying rational when others weren't. That alone made Charlie richer than he had any right to be. It's not genius, it's not luck. It's refusing to copy stupidity just because it's popular. If you want to measure yourself, don't use averages. Do you live below your means? Do you invest in productive assets? Do you avoid debt? Do you keep compounding decade after decade without blowing yourself up? If the answer is yes, you'll do fine. Maybe even better than fine. Because compounding doesn't care about averages. It only cares about behavior. Charlie never planned to become a billionaire. He just avoided disaster long enough that the compounding overshot. That's the way wealth really works. No neat charts, no average, but a handful of rational habits repeated for a lifetime. So next time you see a headline screaming average net worth by age, laugh at it. It's entertainment, not guidance. The real question isn't whether you're ahead or behind the herd. It's whether you're thinking like the herd at all. Because average thinking produces average results. And average results are nothing to envy. If you want to be above average in wealth, you have to be above average in discipline. And that's the only equation that matters. Everything else is just noise. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like, subscribe for more personal finance content, and if you have any questions or requests, or you would like to discuss your financial journey on the show with me, please feel free to email me at financialbasicsabc@gmail.com. Goodbye.